Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. This is the beginning of a new series for this term, which I think should probably run the entire term, as it's going to be quite a comprehensive course looking at creating a master copy of a figure painting. So I've chosen a fairly kind of classical, kind of academic figure painting, but you can copy anything you like. The one I've picked is a painting by the pre-Raphaelite British painter Waterhouse. It's an interesting piece. There's got a lot of character to it, and it's got a nice mixture of textures. So there's landscape, really interesting drapery fabrics, obviously the skin and hair. So there's a lot of different textures that you're working with, which is really interesting, and all the different aspects of the painting just interact really nicely. It's got a nice looseness to certain aspects, and then also it's very rendered and nicely drawn in terms of the painting in the figure. So I'm going to be working, you have to excuse my cough, I've got a bit of a cold this week. I'm going to be working slightly differently to normal. So usually I'll have a toned canvas. You may remember from some previous videos when I'm doing a layered painting. But for this one I'm going to be working on a white canvas. It's quite large, so I'm working on a 30 by 40 inch canvas. When you're working on yours, you can work at any size you like, but I've decided to go for something quite big, so it's going to be a fairly elaborate set of lessons, which should hopefully be interesting for you guys. So the way I'm approaching this one, rather than working on a toned surface, and this is just to give you an option, so I didn't have my canvas prepared today, so I just stretched it today. I'm going to do my painting in raw umber, my underpainting, so just getting my shapes in and blocking everything in for this first session. I'll let that dry. Once that's totally dry, I'm going to do a wash in burnt umber. I'm going to try to take a time lapse of that, and I'll upload that as a separate video later this week. And that will, because the wash will be transparent, you'll still be able to see the drawing underneath or the painting underneath. So I'll still have all my shapes. And in a way it's useful for this piece because this is quite everything in this piece is quite translucent, so there's some really nice kind of very intense high chroma reflected lights in the shadows. And I don't want to go too heavy with my shadows, so this way it'll be kind of, the shadows will sort of be, they'll kind of glow because they already have a transparency over them when I do the burnt umber wash. But hopefully you guys will see that effect. So I'm just going to be working by eye. I'm not going to take any measurements. I'm just working with raw umber, a fairly big bristle brush, kind of rough bristle brush, because I'm just roughly blocking things in. I've marked on my reference a center point, so I'm going to mark a similar center point. That's going to be my only kind of major measurement. Up there, center. So I've got a center point marked on my reference, and now I've got a center point marked on the canvas. You can see I'm trying to work quite loosely, so it's a long brush, but I'm holding it very far back. Just going to double check that my focus is in the right place. That should be right. So we can get started. So I'm gonna have the reference up next to me as I work, so you guys can sort of follow along. And I'm just going to start by blocking kind of the general shape of the torso in. So we've got a little bit of an angle coming back, cutting into where the ribs are, and then down to the bum, and then the legs kind of stretch out. And I'm just going to be using this central mark, a bit like a giant grid. Can sometimes be useful. So if that's the top of the legs, they're going to be roughly over there, and then pretty much the whole side of the figure on this left hand side just runs down next to that central line. And then I'm just going to kind of eyeball roughly where things come off. So I'm going to call about there, where the arm's coming off. That's the other rib wobbling down. So I'm just going to like roughly chop it in. It's not going to be super accurate, this. The elbow kind of sticks out about halfway into that quadrant. Then got some kind of angles cutting back. About there, it's not too bad. By holding the brush back so far, I'm kind of forcing myself to be pretty general with this. Trying to kind of imbue it with a reasonable liveliness. So we've got a central line running up here, kind of down to that hand, which then claws up a bit, gets tangled. Won't put too much detail into that, we'll get that later, a lot later in the piece. So that's our outside line there, kind of roughly blocked in. I'll just catch this. So I'm just going for a general gesture here. The other side of her waist down there, which cuts back in, looking at a horizontal alignment about where, maybe into about that point there. Get that to cut out, and angle back, but maybe a bit wider, so I'll make that correction. I've just got a piece of kitchen towel here. I'm just going to put just an angle across the top here, just to gauge whether everything's kind of roughly mapping correctly. So we want to have enough space between where this tree comes down, kind of angles back in there a bit, and then that sort of branches over and frames, creates this sort of negative shape up here. out where the drapery might fall. And I'm kind of looking at this negative shape of that where the hair drapes over, seeing how much space I can find. So you can see I'm fairly kind of liberal with my corrections. That's the main thing at this stage. It only needs to be kind of roughly blocked in. I'm going to be spending a lot more time working on things. This head's a little bit tricky because of the quite substantial foreshortening going on in it. Just blocking a little suggestion of the face there, and then also a little bit of these shadows. Some of these shadows might prove useful. So then got our head draping down. Running through the fingers there. And again we've got this shadow here which is kind of worthwhile to put in, I think. So now over this kind of lightly drawn in sketch, I can start to go a bit more definite with some of the shapes and make corrections at the same time. So you'll see I dropped bottom of this arm a bit. This mineral spirit just to erase some of these things. I'm going to neaten it out a bit. It's not necessary to erase everything, just things that are kind of double lines that might prove complex later on. But just about getting there with this general sketch. drapes down there. But we won't go into too much detail with that. We're just going to put some little notes for what's going on in the background, but not too much detail. And then I might just get this. That's not too bad for the general blocking in of this top section. So just have a work on the legs now. The legs are largely drapery, but we do have a sense of where they're kind of bending in, what's going on with them. Certainly we want to get kind of the sense of the drapery kind of falling over both legs. And then also just this general shape where the drapery falls, where it tucks and wraps and where it kind of drops down. And that sort of wraps, this bit kind of wraps down around the feet, which sit kind of just inside. The central line. That's not too bad. Can make a little suggestion of some of the lines, the drapery and what it's doing in there. And then, see a little bit of that back foot as well. Just angling out kind of through here. Something like that. So pretty much feels reasonably in proportion, that figure, I think, which is what we're generally looking for. Possibly, actually, I'd say this foot needs to go down. So while those were nicely painted in feet, they weren't quite low enough, so it made the whole figure feel a bit lower part of the figure feel a bit cramped. So that's about halfway. So we've got a mark about halfway there. That's half again. Probably the lower foot should actually have been more here. So I think the shape of it was correct, and this is often the case. You get the shape correct, but it just wasn't placed correctly, and that would have just thrown everything else off later on, or we just would have needed to correct it later on. And it's better to just make this correction now if you spot it. Yeah, that's a bit better. Feels more correct. So the last thing we'll do is just put some suggestion of the background. But as I say, we don't need to do a ton of that immediately. So it's water down below with the reflection of the foot. All these bits of drapery, but we'll get into them in more detail later in the painting. Got that tree already kind of roughly blocked in from earlier. This background. That tree kind of cuts things back in a little bit more than we have it. A few other bits of lines for the background. Head kind of comes up there, and then canopy of trees. You kind of have that sliver of the background showing through, and the sky showing through. More of these rocks. Grass dropping up there. Won't go into detail with that. Then this bank side. Shapes of these trees. We'll find them later. Lower portion of this bank side, and then we pretty much just got water beyond that. There's a little bit of like a rock just there. That's about it for this block-in. So about this amount of detail would be sufficient. So what I've done is all you would need to do. Before adding your Campitura, which is the ground colour, which will be what we paint the rest of everything over. So as I say, the ground colour will just be like a kind of a glaze of paint, thin enough to show all of what's going on through it. Be kind of laid. Painted over all this. Just gonna rework ever so slightly this little bit here. Yeah, so we're gonna put a wash of burnt umber over this. That'll give us our kind of our tones to work with as we progress. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we'll leave it there for now. I'm going to post a time lapse of adding the ground colour midweek this week, before the next video next week. As always, if you want to keep up to date with all the videos that are on, sign up. If you want feedback and advice from me, my fellow tutors, then follow the link through to OCAD's course page to sign up. But yeah, that's it for now. and I'll see you guys soon.